Welcome to The Real News. I'm Mark Steiner. Good to have you all with us today. You know, the Australian wildfires are on a scale the modern world has really never seen before. 16 million acres, at least 1 billion animals perished, and at least 27 people have been killed. As the fire raged, one of the world's most important tennis tournaments was about to begin, the Australian Open, one of the majors. But this time, the players got sick, couldn't breathe, collapsed, accused the tournament of putting their profits over people. And as Edge of Sports host and Nation sports editor Dave Zirin wrote in his article for The Nation, the Australian Open is the tip of a melting iceberg. Well, from hockey rinks melting to golf courses underwater, all manner of outdoor sports are now threatened by climate change. And Dave Zirin, welcome back. Good to have you with us here on The Real News.
Oh, it's great to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. Good article, too.
Thank you.
Important one. So I want to play this short piece here. This is Dalia Jakubovic, who is a Slovenian player who collapsed, gasping for air in the early part of this tournament. This is what she had to say about that.
I mean, it was really scary. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do. I had the feeling like I'm going to collapse on the court, and I was really scared, I have to say. And no one from us had these kind of conditions before. We are used to pollution, like we play in China, we play in more polluted countries, but I mean, smoke is something different, and for sure we are not used to it.
So as you wrote, and as The Guardian also did a piece, I mean, this is without kind of the political nuance of yours, but they did a piece as well. But this was horrendous what happened. I mean, player after player standing up and saying, enough is enough. We are not going to, this is absurd for us to take this at the bottom of the ladder. Talk a bit about what that political dynamic was that happened in all of this.
Well, the political dynamic people have to understand is class, because class exists even in the world of tennis. You have Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer at the top of the pyramid. And then you have all of these players trying to make it to the Australian Open through the qualifying rounds. And it was players like Natalia, players on the lower end of the spectrum of tennis and of purses and of commercialism, who are just trying to hang on and make it to the Australian Open, who are the ones who are vomiting and so affected because the qualifying rounds all take place outside. And what's particularly egregious about that is that the government in Australia had told people that they need to keep their pets inside the day that they had tennis players playing outside. So you had homes near the tournament where the families were keeping their dogs and cats indoors while tennis players were outside playing and suffering all sorts of health problems and debilitations because of the wildfires.
I mean, as you pointed out, there were players who actually called out Federer and the others, saying, "Why aren't you speaking up? Why aren't you saying something about this?" You know, and that, you know, I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's just that there's no union. So you know, while in other sports you do have this kind of solidarity that exists. Take NFL football, for example, where the star quarterback and the third string wide receiver are going to have some common interests in terms of collective bargaining. That doesn't exist in the world of tennis. And so you do have this way that class cuts through the very livelihoods of different players. And as we're seeing now, it cuts through whether or not a player gets to breathe or not. Now, one of the top players who has been in solidarity, just I got to give him credit, is Novak Djokovic, who's the third of the three great tennis stars with Nadal and Federer. And Djokovic has long been an advocate of forming some sort of union. But I think it goes beyond unionism, frankly. I think the players should be going on strike unless they can be guaranteed safe and healthy working conditions. Because that's really where we are right now. Without collective action, I mean, they're going to be living through a special kind of hell, doing what they supposedly are supposed to love.
But I want to take a little digression here. You know, I was reading that Roger Federer, about him and how Greta Thunberg called him out because of his sponsorship of Credit Suisse. And he wrote her this piece saying, as a father of 4 young children and fervent supporter of universal education, I have a great deal of respect and admiration for the youth climate movement, and I'm grateful to young climate activists for pushing us all to examine our behaviors and act on innovative solutions. We owe it to them and ourselves to listen. Of course, and then Credit Suisse wanted her to come to a meeting with them. So that's easy to say, but this is, when I thought about the juxtaposition of what she said and those wildfires, and then what this means for the future of kids, adults, professionals, amateurs playing outside.
No, that's right. And I found Federer's article to be condescending pablum that might have been written by somebody on his PR team, while Greta Thunberg, I feel like, really represents the fierce urgency of now that so many of us are feeling with regards to climate and climate activism, because it really isn't just tennis. What we're talking about is the whole of the sports world that could effectively be either underwater or on fire over the next several decades without intervention. And that intervention, I don't see where it's going to come from if it doesn't come from the athletes themselves. And when we talk about the political power of athletes, anytime we talk about the political power of athletes, your fame really does matter. The size of your pedestal really does matter. And so we do need to be looking and pressuring, quite frankly, the Roger Federers of this world to actually say something beyond corporate speak when it comes to why they promote certain products and why they're not outspoken on these different issues. I mean, if there ever was a moment for Roger Federer to speak out for interest beyond his own, it would be for his fellow compadres in the world of tennis, given what's taking place at the Australian Open. And it has to be said, this is not the first time this has happened at the Australian Open. This is not something that should be taking people by surprise. Of course, this is the first time with the collision of the wildfires and the Australian Open. But as recently as 2013, we were talking about 108-degree temperatures at the Australian Open, 2014 as well. Situations where players' sneakers were melting, situations where people were burning themselves by sitting down on metal chairs, and also some of the same ailments that we're discussing now, such as vomiting and fainting. And it led to all of these heat restrictions that were taking place now with the Australian Open. So maybe we could say no one could have foreseen the fires, but maybe they should have.
And maybe they should have. And I wonder what people like Federer and others should be saying. I mean, Noah Rubin, one of the other players, was kind of really pushing him and saying these things wouldn't have happened if to Federer. He wouldn't be playing in this heat. They wouldn't let that happen. But let that happen to us. So, I mean, how does that... So talk a bit about the politics and how that begins to change. And can we imagine a time when players are actually going to stand up and say, climate change is killing us, it's destroying our way of life, destroying our sports and our earth? I mean, this is kind of what you're talking about. This is that tip of the iceberg we're not talking about.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know if it's imaginable, but it has to be something that we fight for. Because with Roger Federer even spoke about something in terms of, all right, we need to invest in construction on these outdoor tennis courts to make sure that players have the shade that they need to be able to play through the heat in Australia. Or we need to have assurances that players aren't going to go outside when the government is telling people to keep their animals inside. That has an impact way beyond the Noah Rubins of this world, unfortunately. And so what we need so much is for these players to speak out, particularly the players at the top of the sport. Is it imaginable? I'm not sure. But if you told me a decade ago that someone like LeBron James would be speaking out against racist police violence, I would have been very surprised. And yet that happened. So, and that only happened because of the movements in the streets, particularly the Black Lives Matter movement. So it is possible to foresee it, but honestly, it's not going to happen because of Roger Federer's grace and goodwill. It's going to happen because there's a movement to pressure him.
Well, I'm glad one of the things you put in your article that I kind of really enjoyed was the fact that Donald Trump, who doesn't believe in climate change, wants to build a seawall.
Exactly.
Around his golf course in Ireland.
Exactly. The Dunberg course. He wants to make sure that the golf course survives because a lot of these courses, according to Golf Digest, are not going to survive in the decades to come because they're on coastlines. And because, frankly, of the economic devastation to coastlines that golf courses can cause, like the sheer amount of land, the sheer amount of mowing down of trees, all of the things that it takes to build a golf course degrades the land itself and makes it more vulnerable for rising sea lines. Donald Trump sees that when it comes to his own interests. He just lies about it when it comes to the masses of people who support him. And to me, that's a microcosm of what's going to happen in the decades to come. In the decades to come, where you have politicians who are very wealthy look out for their own interests and their own family's interests when it comes to climate change, yet bark out to the masses that it's all some big Chinese hoax.
Well, some big Chinese hoax. Well, I hope that more comes out of this during the Open over the next couple of weeks of the game itself. I mean, the rains have come. It's changed. People forget because the rains have come, but the disaster was so huge. We can only hope that some of the players still continue to stand up and say this has to change.
Right, and it's the same thing with 2016 through 2019, where the heat wasn't as great as 2015. So people said, oh, okay, we've moved on from that. That must have just been a blip. Well, these blips are happening more and more with more ferocity. We can't turn a blind eye just because some rains started to come in.
Dave Zirin, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I really appreciate your writing and your take on things. We need more politics in our sports, and you bring it to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mark.
And I'm Mark Steiner here at the Real News Network. Thank you all for joining us. Let us know what you think. Take care.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.